Hi and welcome to Talk It, Do It, the channel where we make tech videos that are more than hello world. In today's video, we will have a special guest, Sameera. You may remember Sameera from a previous video. Welcome Sameera, and over to you.
Thank you, and I'm happy to now walk you through how we can use the Pulumi MCP server to build infrastructure, starting with an Azure AKS cluster. Pulumi has a good blog about their recent MCP server, and the links will be in the description below. You can see the MCP config here, and you can use Cursor, but today we will be using both Claude Code and Claude Desktop as the MCP clients. Pulumi MCP Server looks really interesting and especially helpful as we rapidly move towards AI ops and agentic AI workflows. It is worth noting, this is still experimental, so this is subject to change. We did test this earlier, and you can see the code that the Pulumi MCP Server wrote for us, which worked really well. And here, at the top right of the screen, we are just asking Cursor to run a Pulumi preview, just so that I can show you what would be created based on the previous code you see on the left. Don't worry, we will be deleting this code, and I will show you live how we can use the Pulumi MCP server to generate the code based on our instructions, then run a Pulumi preview, and also run a Pulumi up to build the AKS cluster, all using the tools from the MCP server. Let's open Claude Code in our ghosty shell. Here I will show you the previously initiated Pulumi program and the supporting YAML files for our dev stack. And you can see our instructions which we copied from the Pulumi blog page. This is a simple instruction just for testing. Now let's make sure our index.ts file is empty, as we want the MCP server to generate the code for us. Now let's run Claude Code and check our MCP server status. It is connected. To add this, just type the following. This will set up the Pulumi MCP server to run in Claude Code. Now we can talk with Claude Code and ask for the instructions and config to be read, so that it will use the Pulumi MCP server tools to generate the code and then preview and build our infrastructure. We now just let Claude and the MCP servers figure out what is needed based on our instructions, and then work through to generate the new index.ts file code for our AKS cluster. And here we have the code that we can use, and which will be used for the Pulumi preview and the Pulumi up tasks. Remember, this was generated by the Pulumi MCP server tools. Now we can see the MCP server tools being used to run a Pulumi preview, and we see the changes that will be made. We also get feedback and can see our instructions will be followed. We can see the region is UK South, and the version from our instructions is correct, and we see the VM SKU size is what we wanted to. And now we can let the MCP server run our Pulumi up and actually build the AKS cluster. Let's see this in action. It is worth noting that this has been sped up as creation time for an AKS cluster can take quite a few minutes. We can see some of the other MCP server tools being used for the stack outputs. This is our kube config for this short-lived AKS cluster, which will be deleted shortly. Brilliant. The AKS cluster was successfully built using the Pulumi MCP server tools. We can now connect and quickly check we can see the nodes and namespaces on this test cluster. Let's ask Claude now. Claude had an issue, so I used the AZ CLI command to connect. What's really good is Claude still had the context from before of our instructions to list the nodes and namespaces. And we get back our node and also the namespaces on the cluster. Let's ask Claude to create a new namespace for us, just to make sure that we can also create objects on our cluster and not just read. And it has been created, so let's just ask Claude to describe this new namespace for us. And there we go, it has returned the description of the namespace. Now let's ask Claude to destroy this cluster for us, based on our dev stack, as it was only for this quick test. We shall also see this run in Claude Desktop shortly too. I will not show the destroy in action, but let's quickly ask Claude to use the Pulumi MCP server to run a preview and make sure it would create the resources again to demonstrate that our Pulumi state is clean, and would see that all resources in our dev stack need to be recreated again. We can see here that 4 resources would be created based on our dev stack. It is also interesting that Claude is saying, our infrastructure is not destroyed. I will respectfully question this response from Claude, as we are only interested in checking what our Pulumi state would see as needing to be created. It is fair to say that Claude is not able to 100% check the cluster is destroyed without more context or instruction, so this could be something we improve at a later time. Let's say our thanks and move on to using the Pulumi MCP server in our favourite MCP client, Claude Desktop. Let's go open Claude Desktop, where we have also added the Pulumi MCP server. We will also be using our Kubernetes MCP server that we created in a previous video. There will be a link to that video showing you how we created the Kubernetes MCP server, which is worth a watch if you have not seen it already. Familiar instruction being asked in Claude chat. We will pass our Pulumi stack path to Claude to use with the Pulumi MCP server tools. You can see the Pulumi MCP Server's tools are being used here as well. Excellent indeed. And here we get the feedback from the Pulumi preview that was run against our dev stack. This should look familiar from what we ran earlier. You may notice there is a different Kubernetes version that will be created. I generated a new index.ts file in Claude Desktop using the Pulumi MCP Server tools, but did not want to show that again, as we have seen it already in the Claude code section. I just wanted to mention that for those eagle-eyed viewers who will spot this. Now, the Pulumi MCP Server tools are being used to run the Pulumi up to start to build the AKS cluster and the supporting resources. Again, this part is sped up due to creation time of an AKS cluster. And there we go, we have again successfully created an AKS cluster using the Pulumi MCP server, this time with Claude Desktop. Absolutely brilliant to see how these tasks are being simplified through AI and MCP servers. As promised earlier, let's now see us using our own Kubernetes MCP server that we created in a previous video and that we have available in our Claude Desktop. I will try and place a link to that video on screen here if I can. With the AKS cluster that we have just built, we can now talk to this cluster using our very own Kubernetes MCP server. Hopefully you start to see how MCP servers can form a key set of capabilities as part of a Platform Engineering Toolkit that we are building in this series. Here is our MCP tool being called. And just like that, we get a list of namespaces back from the cluster. Pretty sweet to have this capability in an AI chat client. And something we could easily add to a pipeline or an agentic AI workflow. Now we can ask to create a new namespace and then describe it for us. Let's call it Pulumi MCP test and then ask for all namespaces to be listed so that we can check it was created successfully. And let's send the request now. Again, it is using our very own Kubernetes MCP server and its tools to create the namespace and to then list all namespaces, but using the intelligence of Claude models. Great collaboration, if you ask me. I want to quickly show you that even though we have set up and have been using Pulumi MCP servers, we can still use the Pulumi CLI directly, on the same stack and code. I have jumped into the Cursor IDE to run some commands using Pulumi. Here we are running a Pulumi up, but using the Pulumi CLI. This is being driven by Cursor, which is using the Claude models. I do tend to find Claude models are really good for coding tasks. I added a deliberate error, as I always like to test if AI-based IDE workflows can pick up on errors quickly. I instructed to use a non-valid Kubernetes version. It picked it up and quickly worked through suggesting and using a valid Kubernetes version for the AKS cluster. This section is sped up as it can take some time for an AKS cluster to be created, and I'm sure you have better things to do than wait for the cluster to be built. And good news, that cluster was successfully created. We can now move on again to use our very own Kubernetes MCP server, but this time in Cursor IDE. And would you look at that? Our Kubernetes MCP servers tools are being called and used in this IDE environment. We could use it in other MCP clients like Augment Code, VS Code, or even custom MCP clients. Powerful stuff for sure. Now we will create a new namespace called talkitdoit-ns. And then let's create a deployment and a service. Instruct it to use port 8080 to our cluster, and then we can check it is accessible on the cluster we just built. As this is a simple test, we will just quickly deploy it and make it available publicly. In a real enterprise scenario, the cluster would be private and the services would be accessible via gateways and secure connections only. Here you can see our instructions being sent and actioned. We are still using our own Kubernetes MCP server and its tools to manage this interaction with our AKS cluster. This would also work if we had an EKS cluster from AWS or a GKE cluster from Google. It would also work if you run a Kind or Minikube cluster. So now we get to the part where the namespace is created, the deployment and service are also created. We now want to get the information of the service so that we can test we can connect to it. We are being shown the details of the Nginx URL, and also some checks were run to make sure the pod is running and available. Let's grab the URL details, copy them, and open a simple browser in this IDE, and then we can paste the URL and we should see the Nginx web page if it really has been set up correctly. And it has, and we can see the page as expected. We have finished our testing of the Pulumi MCP server, so now we just want to make sure all the infrastructure and resources are destroyed to ensure we do not leave anything accessible, and also to make sure we are not paying costs for things we no longer need. So that is looking good, and our resources have all now been destroyed successfully. Hopefully you found this video useful, and links to the Pulumi blog page will be in the description below. It has been fun presenting this to you, and hopefully I will be invited back again soon. I will hand you back to Talk It Do It. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
A huge thank you to our guest Sameera. That was some exciting stuff you showed there. and you have an open invitation to be a special guest again. I know you are working on some more exciting projects, and we look forward to hearing about them real soon. I just want to thank you all for watching, as it really is appreciated. We are working on more videos, so put the notification bell on if you're subscribed. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully see you all on the next video. Bye for now.